Top of the middle of the day to you, boys and girls. We're at the bench in the shop for another little narrative session. Today, for your viewing pleasure, we're going to be talking about all kinds of monkey business, but I need to kind of go down this other road here for a second. So I had an epiphany. I'm thinking April Fool's revolves around the concept of about the middle of March, third week in March, the weather starts to warm up. You think, oh yeah, great, awesome. Old man winter has released his grip a little bit. Then 1st of April, boom, you get hammered with a snowstorm. April Fools, everybody, really not letting go. We had a pretty interesting winter this year. Seemed like it came a little bit late, and when it came, it was impressive. So hopefully everybody's recovering from that process. Now I'll get into disclaimers. So this is the narrative. We're at the bench. We're going to cover the gambit, do some follow-up, do some initial exposure. But anyway, all this information is coming from the depths of my cranium. Please forgive me if and or when I slur and or stammer in my speech. I call that slammering. I made that word up, melded slur and stammer together. Check the descriptions for any clarifications. I'm only human. I make mistakes. Have to qualify, clarify, correct myself sometimes. My contact information is generally in the description area of the videos. So we kind of covered all the other side. Oh, there's going to be some activity, but it's mostly with my flanges that are going on. So there's no actual activity other than that. There's going to be a lot of this, of course. So if you're a knuckle / gearhead, I consider myself 80% knuckle, about 20% gear. You might find this interesting and enjoyable. If not, this is all the activity you're going to see. So at least I've been forthright in the beginning. So with that being said, we have a 562. It's headed back to, I think it's Pennsylvania, but it could be New York. I can't remember now where the gentleman lives. My 462 down on the end. We have some 346 pistons, a couple 346 cylinders, a couple other pistons, a 661 cylinder assembly, some spark plugs. So we're going to cover a whole bunch of ground today. So fielding some questions about the 346, that was an ongoing, interesting process. I will make mention that's the only saw I melted down in my career, and I did it purposefully, and I took everybody along for the ride because in the R&D process, you're trying things that are outside the norm. You have to push the limits, and if you don't push the limits, you can't ever find out where the limits are. So initially that saw was revving over, what, 17,000, I don't know, 17.2 or something. It had an actual torque tune in that cylinder. It did not have a rev tune. I'm going to do a secondary cylinder. Haven't had time to get around to it, and I'm going to do a rev tune in that one. About a meteor assembly, because we're going to see what we can get, and if it self-destructs, oh well. I did take the third video in this saga, but I haven't posted it yet because I've been waiting till I get this version done so I can go back to back. But basically there was a lot of scuttlebutt about being excessively lean in the process because I don't know why people call it four-stroking, but they do. And that it wasn't actually four-stroking, but if you get a highly refined and tuned engine, you might not necessarily be able to audibly hear the four-stroking, which is technically a fuel miss at high idle is really what that is. It's not four-stroking. There's nothing, yeah, there's all kinds of stuff. It wasn't excessively lean either. In the third video, I show a couple times where I bottom the high-speed needle out all the way. The saw will barely run. It doesn't even make enough power to hurt itself. When you find that you have problems with a lean C situation, it is slightly to moderately lean. What the percentage is I don't know where they run, but it's slightly lean to moderately lean, not maximum to bottomed out lean. They won't even hardly run. You're going to get excessively lean. So some people need to go back to the drawing board with that concept in their brain because they're mistaken, and we're going to kind of look at why I make that statement. So anyway, oh, and I actually talked to a guy that I know that builds, him and his partner build fancy the quads essentially that do sand drags, and he does motorcycle engines, he does race engines for trucks a lot of times, he's done some blown alcohol engines. I kind of run that whole concept by his bow, and he said the same thing as me. He's found the same thing to be true. You got to have them, you can't have them at maximum lean. They won't even hardly run. They don't make enough power to even hurt themselves. So anyway, I'm hoping he'll chime in on this video. It's always a pleasure when he does, because he knows way more than I do about a lot of things, and I listen when he talks, basically. Or when he talks, I listen. That's probably how it really works. So anyway, if we want to look at the 346, lean seas is usually associated with a meltdown on the intake side, which obviously it's still pristine. Now I have this highly accurate and precisely calibrated instrument on the end of my finger, index finger on my right hand to be exact, called my fingernail. And if we are checking for machine grooves, which I do a lot, I don't know if you can actually hear that. They're prevalent all across the intake. There's no real discoloration issues. There's a little bit of color happening there, but it's nothing that's concerning necessarily. If we roll around on the exhaust side, as I was talking about in a lot of the dialogue, we had a meltdown off to the drive side only. It wasn't in the main part of the front of the thrust surface, and it wasn't off to the flywheel side. There's no evidence of any problems. Again, tactile inspection reveals consistent and similar machine grooves. Yeah. If we look at the second operation, here we are again with the intake side. Now we're starting to get a little bit of color. I can't necessarily, maybe some super light scoring, can't really, maybe just a little bit. But considering this was the piston that came out of it before or previously, intake side looks awesome, not a lot of wear, not a lean seas issue. So roll around to the front side, or what we would call the exhaust side of the skirt. Here we go again. Starting to be a little bit more impressive. The meltdown problem, again, it's starting to creep over to the very front of the thrust surface. Again, we've melted down a piston already in that cylinder, but off to the flywheel side, it's still really nice with machine grooves. So third one, like I said, haven't posted the video yet. Here we go again. Intake side is pristine, machine grooves prevalent, no real issues, not even any scoring, less so than in the second one. These are all spinning over 16. I think all of them at some point were over 17,000 RPMs. Now we start to get a little bit more impressive in the third meltdown in the process. So I've only melted down one cylinder in the entire career. In my entire career, I fell for years and years. I've worn out many saws. I took everybody along for the ride in this process. Okay, so since we're on the piston kick, we might as well go down that rabbit hole just a little bit further. So I have a 390 piston. This came out of a saw that went over to Switzerland, and this saw came out of the box with a B designated cylinder, and it had an AB piston. The tolerance was sloppy straight out of the gate. I watched those saws that come with that fitment a little more closely than other saws. If we look at the front of the skirt, we see that it's pretty much just awesome and pristine. Again, highly calibrated and super accurate method of checking machine grooves. My fingernail, pretty consistent across the front of the skirt. If we roll around to the back, we'll see a lot of shininess down low, and we're going to see some associated color wear. I don't know if they're issues. They really don't feel bad. A lot of times, brand new piston will come out of the box and it'll have places where the cardboard box is rubbed on the piston. I actually had to warranty a 661 piston. It came out of the box and the ring was sticking in the upper ringland. Somebody had dropped it in the process. You see all kinds of stuff. So, but anyway, what's happening here is we have a couple of lines running with the stroke essentially, and you can feel them. There's pistons come out of the box like that sometimes. Who knows if a piece of debris went through the process, or there's a little slight casting flaw on the edge of the port and the piston rubs it off. I mean, but you see that kind of thing. We're not so much worried about those as opposed to the ones you can really feel that are heavy gouges. Color doesn't really affect it that much, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But anyway, what happens is when the tolerance is sloppy out of the gate, as it was the case in this particular assembly, it allows the piston to get a little bit more cockeyed in the process, especially when you're going over top dead center and the centripetal force of the rod is kind of rolling around and it's actually got a vector that's coming out toward the front. Your piston's getting a little bit more cockeyed in there. It's able to run at a little bit more of an angle, and we get a lot more associated wear on the back intake side in a much quicker fashion. That's pretty consistent in sloppy tolerant saws. That's just the way it seems to work. Why they do what they do with the fitting a B cylinder with an AB piston, which again, that's half thousandth smaller than B size. You wouldn't think half thousandths is much, but in this application, when talking about a machine that's spinning up 10, 12,000 RPMs, that's kind of a big deal. Why they do that, I don't have any idea. I don't. If we take a look at this, it's a 372X torque piston. It was run Formula K2, 25 hours, I think it was. Maybe it was a little bit less. I don't remember, but it wasn't long. This piston doesn't have a lot of time on it. It appears that it's been running rich from the top of the dome. If we look at the thrust surfaces on the exhaust side, we can see some color issues. It's actually pretty smooth below the bottom ringland, all the way down the thrust surfaces. It's like a little intermediate. There's places where it feels like it's a little bit better than others. Down low on the skirt below this color band right here, it's super awesome actually, pretty much new from the tactile feel. And off to the side, machine grooves are awesome. If we go around on the intake side, it's pretty smooth on the thrust surface. There's some machine grooves in there, but they're slight. You get down low, pretty shiny. These saws have a lot of tolerance. Again, we were talking about how the piston gets cockeyed. Where's the back of that skirt? Pretty heavily in conjunction with, there's like the bandwidth is about right there, which you can hopefully see the color. Maybe we better address that a little bit. So some people might consider this to be that gray line syndrome, blue line syndrome, whatever it is. It looks kind of blue to me, but I'm a little colorblind, I think. Anyway, ghosting phenomenon is what I call it. And check that video. We're going to get into like that whole concept a little bit in more detail. But anyway, people would probably mistake that for ghosting right there if they were looking at it, because this is a, I don't know, auto-tune essentially. Well, actually it's not auto-tune. You can control the carburetor, but it definitely has the smog design cylinder, which that seems to be more so the issue than the actual electronic system. But I digress. Anyway, if we're looking at this band right here, we would go, yeah, that's probably ghosting, or the gray or the blue line syndrome, or whatever it is. It's really not. So if we want to talk about piston construction for a second, there is no pistons are this. People talk about them being tapered. Yeah, kind of. People talk about them being oval. Yeah, kind of. It depends on which piston you're talking about, because they're not all the same. They'll be the same in any model, but from one model to the next, they might be a little bit different in the way they're shaped. So the design is a little different. The construction's a little different. Why they do that has something to do with the heat transference, I'm sure. So anyway, if we think about a barrel, generally in the middle of the barrel, it's got a much greater diameter. Pistons are kind of barrel shaped, but generally it's down low. And we see this band right here that's shiny. machine grooves are just barely able to be felt for such a low hour runtime machine, and we have that big band of associated wear. In the beginning, it was actually greater in diameter right here than right here. So that's why you get that wear pattern happening right there. So they're kind of barrel shape. I mean, I've seen pistons be 0.2 to 1/1000 greater in diameter here. I've seen them basically maintain a parallel diameter to here and then drop like 10-12 thousandths. I've seen them taper all the way. Yeah, they're dealing with the expansion, obviously, but like I said, different pistons are made different ways. So a lot of times the older style Stihl pistons will be concentric around above the top ringland, around the top of the crown. Sometimes they'll be actually greater in diameter across, well, if you run parallel with the wrist pin, 2 to 1.5 thousandths, 2/10 thousandths to 1.5 thousandths, essentially. Sometimes they'll be exactly the same diameter. Sometimes they'll actually be bigger in diameter on the thrust surfaces. You have to look at the construction of the piston. A lot of times in some of the new smog saws, there's a lot more material on the sides. The piston will be a different shape. People talk about how they are that oval shape. Well, actually, a new 390 piston's pretty oval, pretty consistently oval, but they're more of a full circle motorcycle style. Some of the open windowed, they're round. Some of them are greater in diameter. Some of them are greater in diameter across the thrust surfaces. There is no pistons are oval. That is not an accurate statement. You have to get your mic out and start checking them. So if we talk about the ones that are bigger across the wrist pin, we'll run parallel with the wrist pin. My assertion is we get a cooling effect from the charge that's running across the top of the crown. It's going to be slight because the wind's happening so fast, but it's going to be there. So that's just a consideration that I have. Whether that's accurate, I'm not exactly positive, but it makes sense from a physics perspective. The open windowed ones that are completely round, there's not a lot of material on the side to expand differently, so you don't have to have a different shape up here. It seems like the pistons that have a lot of material inside, I don't know if that's for support or what it is. Seems like those will be a little smaller, going to allow for a greater thermal expansion because of the extra weight of all the material. So just a consideration, yeah, they're not exactly oval, and they're not exactly barrel-shaped either. They're not exactly perfectly tapered because they'll be smaller down at the bottom than they will be in the band, and they'll be smaller again. So, like, I just thought that was something that was very interesting. I'm hoping everybody else finds this to be interesting, and we talk about what the piston's actually doing in the process. For basic operations, we're gonna transfer the explosion energy to the rod so the engine will actually run, spin, run, same concept. That's probably pretty primary in the process. We're a heat sink. We're gonna suck up some of the heat energy from the combustion process, transfer it over to the cylinder wall. We're probably going to do a little bit of transferring a little bit of it to the charge, although that wind's happening so fast it rolls through a saw running at 10-12,000 RPMs again. The charge rolling through the process is happening so fast there's probably not a lot of heat getting transferred to it, but there'll be a little bit. We're going to pressurize the crankcase as the piston rolls down through bottom dead center. That's going to stuff the charge up across the crown, again, keeping the cycle going, and the piston in a two-cycle engine, piston port anyway, controls all the timing of the ports, shutting down the intake, opening up the exhaust. It's basically controlling all the port timing through the process, so they have a pretty complicated operation and function, as opposed to maybe something you'd see in a car, which really cool that they are responsible for so much as opposed to a 4-cycle engine. It's kind of interesting. They're super simplistic. At the same time, they're kind of a little bit complicated. So anyway, I guess we'll continue the saga. And yeah, I'm a little bit cautious about what I show. We can look down in there and we can see above and below the exhaust port off to the drive side. There's scoring in the cylinder. We can see that there's really nothing on the flywheel side. We can see there's some casting issues on the roof of the exhaust. And that would be consistent with what I'm talking about as far as I think there's some kind of thermal expansion that's happening in the cylinder that's not consistent all the way across the front of the exhaust port. It's causing the cylinder to grow a little bit more on the drive side. Hence, we have meltdown after meltdown after meltdown, which kind of corroborates that with no evidence of lean seizing whatsoever. So we're going to be working on the Meteor operation here hopefully soon, but who knows. I will mention that this cylinder, I had to take 11 thousandths off the base to get it to sit square on the cases, because initially it was Leaning Tower of Pisa. That's the only one I've ever seen have a problem like that, an anomaly. If we look at the 661 cylinder, this would be one of those things that makes you go, So let's look at the piston first, actually. So this came in on a customer saw, and it was run only at the factory, so it didn't run long, as evidenced from how nice the intake side of the skirt looks. If we roll around on the exhaust side, it is also pristine. There's nothing wrong with it at all. There's not even any really scoring issues. There's maybe some color lines in there, but not really anything that you can feel. But I was going to clean this up, and you can see it actually started the process, and I thought we better actually kind of look at this and, I don't know, get it out there, I guess. Something rubber was involved in this process. I tried cleaning it off, and then I thought maybe somebody else would be interested in the process. So it's got some kind of a rubber goo on the top of the dome that's through the combustion process of heat and pressure has welded itself to the dome. This is the exhaust side, so it's trying to evacuate, which is consistent with the flow in the process. If we take a look in at the cylinder, that kind of has corroborated what I'm saying. We can see on the exhaust side of the cylinder is where everything's pretty much caked on, so it's trying to evacuate whatever in the heck that is or was. So never seen that before. That would be consistent with when you were a kid, you went to the vending machine, you got a Coke with an insect in it or something. That used to happen once in a while. I used to see those when I was a kid, but they were super rare. That would be a super rarity. If we want to talk about the plugs for a minute, I haven't really gotten into plug concept talks yet. So from what I understand, plugs were designed around an automobile application. So what's that, 2,000 to 3,000 RPMs or something like that? They're not designed to run at high RPMs for continuous amounts of time, unless you go to a different kind of a plug. But the general one that I run is a BPM R7A. It's a resistor plug. It's, I don't know, pretty normal. NGK, I chose NGK plugs a while back. I used to run, I never really liked Champions, but I'd run Bosch sometimes. But NGK did a little bit of research. Their plugs actually do a little bit better job with handling heat, I guess. Longevity would be that part of the equation. So I started running NGK plugs pretty consistently a long time ago. Their numbers are opposite. So the higher the number, the cooler the plug, as opposed to the other manufacturers seem to be pretty consistent with the higher the number, the hotter the plug. Don't ask me why they decided to go opposite the grain, but in this world, that's the way it goes sometimes. So I don't know how well you can see this, but this came in a customer saw, and that cylinder and piston were round filed because it was melted down. They thought it was running good. That is a bad situation if you ever see that in your plug. The reason I'm bringing that up is because, well, if we go back on the RPM difference between chainsaws and cars, they wear out really quickly. I can hear the difference in a lot of my saws about 28, 30 hours in the process. The main part of the electrode that comes up through the center, the end of the electrode itself will start to wear off because the spark is trying to jump the gap so many times to get over to the negative side. It'll actually start to wear the electrode off. You think about, you know, taking care of your machines, equipment, whatever, about 30 hours is about life expectancy before it starts to be a problem. Now, if you have to think about the spark jumping the gap, a relatively low voltage system in a chainsaw, the BPM R7As have 10 ohms of resistance, coupled with you adjust the squish band and you increase the combustion. That makes it even harder for the spark to jump across the gap. Voltage is what tells you that you're dealing with a ability of current to jump a gap. That's the voltage concept. Amperage is the amount of current that's flowing through the line, essentially. So voltage gives you the jump. 20 thousandths is, I think, the maximum that they recommend you have in a gap. They don't necessarily suck up heat from the process, but back on the heat thing, they do okay handling the heat. Like I said, that's kind of why I chose those plugs. Now, they do make some high performance plugs, and I'm pretty sure we're not going to be able to see this at all, but there's a little V in the end of the electrode that comes up through the center. I don't know if you can see that or not. So this would be the high performance version. They're not that much more expensive, $2 to $5 or whatever it is, $2.50, $5 more, not much. The projection is the same. That would be the distance from here to the top of the electrode, 3 millimeters, and the reach is the same in the BPM R7A versus the BPM R7Y or the 8Y. So essentially the plugs are physically the same, just a little bit more high performance to work in a application where the saw might be running at, I don't know, 13,000 RPMs or whatever like that when it's working. So we kind of got that part covered, and they make a varying array of the heat ranges, and the ohms of resistance are the same. So again, you're not going to want to have that gap get too far off of there. Let's talk about the 562 for a minute. The only reason I brought this up is because I use my shop scales for relative comparisons weight-wise. I don't necessarily think I'm going to get a weights and measures U.S. Department of accurate number necessarily. However, this saw came in at 13.4 pounds, which is the number that Husqvarna says that it is according to their literature, which this is about a 60 cc saw. Segue over to the 462. They say that that saw is 13.2, coming in at 72.2 cc's. I think this one's just a fuzz under 60. It's like 59.8 or something like that. So with that being said, still kind of took out all the stops, dumping weight, but with that being said, I weighed that saw. However, it's got about 20-25 days of time, cut about 450,000, maybe 475,000 in the process of its existence, and me monkeying around with it. That saw in the current trim right there weighs 13.8 pounds. So still really lightweight, but quite a bit heavier than the half-wrap version and Little Chicken Wimpy Dogs. Now, is there a puff of aluminum in the tank? I doubt it, but it's pretty lightweight. So back on the Chicken Wimpy, we have the little mini clutch cover, which is what the half-wrap saws come with. They come with one dog. I had suspicions that the rescue saw clutch cover was going to be a direct fit, and kind of. We'll look at that real quick, and then we'll go the other direction. So if a guy was to try to get, and I did some research, this is the dog, well, the dog, I think, and on the full wrap version. far as I know. This is going to be the clutch cover that you're going to get on the full wrap saw. And that would be the clutch cover that you're going to get on the half wrap saw. But anyway, part of this little plastic guide and dust flap situation here has to be alleviated with your Dremel, because if we go back on track, if we look at the inside of the Chicken Wimpy clutch cover versus the heavy duty, we see that the dust flap is quite a bit taller. You can see that there's an inch or inch and a quarter gap, and there's maybe 3/4 of an inch, so the dust flap is a little taller. It's a little bit burly in comparison to the Chicken Wimpy clutch cover, but it is not up to par as far as I'm concerned to the industry standard they had for years, of the one that fits the standard big kid style clutch cover that fits on the 066 all the way down to the 044. Mondo dust flap, you're going to throw your chain, that's just the way it goes, might as well have some protection. Side note, I threw the chain and broke that pin off in the process. Dust flap disappears, and this pin also gets broken off, so then I ran this off for a little while with no dust flap whatsoever. Now, it's kind of got a tough guy look to it, and they're similar in that respect. It's just the Chicken Wimpy version's not as wide. So anyway, I asked a Stihl tech guy why they went from the industry standard super bad Jose dust flap, best chip management I've ever seen, to what we see now. And one of the things that I lost in translation, or just kind of didn't really think about necessarily, is the West Coast is kind of a niche market. We run 3/4 wrap, full wrap on our saws for the most part. We run long bars for the most part, and that's not the worldwide norm. We're the niche, even though a lot of guys around here haven't been a lot of other places necessarily to see how it goes. That's kind of just the way it is. We're the niche market, and so they have to do things specific for us. And the part number on that clutch cover is the same on the 3/4 wrap version, and the Rescue, the 462 Rescue saw. Again, we got to make mention that in the Stihl USA website, the 461, 441 are no longer included in the lineup. So we're wrapping it up at the bench. Sometimes the honey needs the do list accomplished, or at least a couple things, and we're taking an intermission or two in the process. So it's always a good thing to be able to help out in that situation, or those situations with that. I need to offer some clarification, because I think there's some confusion in some places about my status. I am not associated and or affiliated with anybody else. It's little old me playing in my own sandbox out on the West Coast. It's just me. I use we a lot. We're going along for the process, experiencing at the same time essentially, and so that's the we thing. Whether we're out in the woods, killing a tree, in the shop, looking at interesting things, it's kind of just the process. We're all included. So there you go with that. I think there's I don't know, like, I think there's things, people try to take advantage of other people's names sometimes. I think there's people that steal other people's intellectual property. I think there's a lot of just interesting stuff that goes on in this world when you're of this world. On the bright side, this is going to air right before Easter, I would imagine, sometime in there. Again, it's the predecessor to the ghosting video, but it's coming online later, so it'll be first in the lineup. Back on track. Easter has a lot of meanings for a lot of people. It's really started from the fact that Christ died on the cross and rose again in 3 days, basically bearing the sins of the world. By faith, we can open the door when he knocks, because he's already accepted us into his heart. The good news kind of talks about us accepting him into ours. It's kind of, he's already done the majority of the process for us, thankfully, of course. So with that being said, the winter was pretty tough. Snow late in a lot of places. People had a lot of hardship this year. I can hope and pray that things are going much better when this one comes online later on in the month, about 3 weeks away at this point. So I'm going to hope and pray that everybody's doing well. Everything's kind of starting to come around a little bit more. I don't know. That's all I can do is just hope and pray that things are maybe going to get a little bit easier, because like we had a rugged winter basically. So with that being said, have a blessed day wherever you might be on his round earth, considering a large part of our nation is white. And thanks for watching.